Larry Ellison, the relentless rebel who conquered Silicon Valley. Hello, dear learners. Welcome back to our channel where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, we dive into the extraordinary life story of one of the most controversial and successful entrepreneurs in technology history, Larry Ellison. This is not just a story, it's a journey of unshakable confidence, fierce competition, and the refusal to ever accept second place. Listening to this story will help you improve your English vocabulary, pronunciation, and listening skills. But more than that, it will show you the power of believing in yourself even when everyone else doubts you, of taking massive risks, and of never settling for mediocrity. So get ready for the most powerful and most inspiring story you've ever heard. Let's start the journey of Larry Ellison, a man who built an empire by refusing to play by anyone else's rules. The beginning, abandoned but not defeated. Lawrence Joseph Ellison was born on August 17, 1944 in New York City, in the middle of World War II. His birth mother, Florence Spellman, was an unmarried 19-year-old Jewish woman living in a difficult time when single motherhood carried heavy social stigma. Florence struggled to care for her infant son alone. When Larry was just 9 months old, he contracted pneumonia, a life-threatening illness for babies in that era. Florence, overwhelmed and unable to cope, made a heartbreaking decision. She sent her baby son across the country to Chicago to be raised by her aunt and uncle, Lillian and Louis Ellison. Larry never saw his birth mother again during his childhood. He grew up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, adopted by the Ellisons, but always aware that something was different about his family situation. Louis was a Russian immigrant who had fled anti-Semitic persecution in his homeland, seeking the American dream in Chicago. He worked as a government auditor, a middle-class job that provided stability but never wealth. Lillian was a warm, loving woman who adored Larry and tried to give him everything she could within their limited means. But Louis was stern, critical, and often harsh with young Larry. He constantly told his adopted son that he would never amount to anything, that he was a dreamer with his head in the clouds, that he would fail at whatever he attempted. These words cut deeply into Larry's soul. Instead of breaking him, however, they ignited a fire inside him. Larry later said, "I have had all the disadvantages required for success." He transformed his adoptive father's negativity into fuel, determined to prove Louis wrong, to show the world that he was capable of extraordinary things. Growing up in Chicago in the 1950s, Larry was a bright but rebellious student. He loved science and mathematics, subjects where there were clear right and wrong answers, where intelligence could be measured and proven. He devoured science fiction novels, imagining futures where technology transformed human civilization. He was fascinated by stories of inventors and entrepreneurs who built something from nothing, who changed the world through force of will and brilliance. These stories planted seeds in young Larry's mind, seeds that would later grow into an unstoppable ambition. Larry attended South Shore High School, where he was known as intelligent but difficult. He questioned teachers, challenged authority, and refused to follow rules that didn't make sense to him. He wasn't trying to be troublesome, he simply couldn't understand why he should obey arbitrary restrictions. This attitude would define his entire career. Larry never accepted that something couldn't be done just because others said so. If someone told him something was impossible, that only made him more determined to prove them wrong. Despite his intelligence, Larry's relationship with his adoptive father remained tense and painful. Louis constantly criticized his choices, his interests, his dreams. Nothing Larry did was ever good enough. This created in Larry a desperate need to succeed, to achieve something so undeniable that even Louis would have to acknowledge it. Years later, Larry would admit that much of his drive came from this deep-seated need to prove his worth, to silence the voice in his head that sounded like Louis telling him he was worthless. The wandering years, searching for purpose. After graduating high school, Larry enrolled at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to study physics and mathematics. He was an excellent student, earning nearly perfect grades and being named Science Student of the Year. Larry loved the intellectual challenge of university, the rigorous thinking required in advanced mathematics and physics. For the first time, he was surrounded by people who valued intelligence and curiosity. He felt like he belonged somewhere. But tragedy struck during his second year. Lillian, his adoptive mother and the one person who had always believed in him unconditionally, died suddenly. Larry was devastated. The woman who had loved him, who had taken him as an infant and raised him as her own, was gone. Larry fell into deep grief and lost all motivation to continue his studies. He dropped out of university without completing his degree, a decision that would haunt him later but felt inevitable at the time. He couldn't concentrate, couldn't care about physics problems when his heart was broken. Larry drifted for a while, unsure of what to do with his life. He enrolled at the University of Chicago for a summer session, but again dropped out before completing the program. He had no degree, no clear career path, and a strained relationship with his adoptive father, who saw Larry's dropping out as confirmation of his predictions of failure. At 22 years old, Larry felt lost and directionless. He had intelligence and ambition, but no outlet for either. In 1966, Larry made a decision that would change everything. He packed his belongings into a beat-up old car and drove west to California. Berkeley, California was the epicenter of the counterculture movement, a place where young people were questioning everything about society and imagining new possibilities. Larry wasn't particularly interested in the political movements of the time, but he was drawn to the spirit of rebellion and reinvention that characterized the era. California represented possibility, a place where you could become anyone, where your past didn't have to define your future. Larry arrived in Berkeley with almost no money, no job prospects, and no connections. He took whatever work he could find, mostly odd jobs that barely paid rent on his small apartment. He worked as a technician, a programmer, moving from company to company, never staying anywhere long. He wasn't fired. He left voluntarily whenever he became bored or felt he wasn't learning anything new. Larry had a restless energy, an inability to settle for comfortable mediocrity. He wanted more, though he wasn't yet sure what more meant. During these years, Larry discovered computer programming. This was the mid-1960s, when computers were massive machines that filled entire rooms, when programming was an arcane skill possessed by only a small number of specialists. Larry found that programming combined his love of mathematics with practical problem-solving. Writing code was like solving puzzles, and Larry was brilliant at it. He taught himself multiple programming languages, staying up late into the night writing code, debugging programs, pushing himself to understand these machines more deeply. Larry worked at various companies throughout the 1970s, Ampex Corporation, Precision Instrument Company, and others. At Ampex, he worked on a database project for the CIA codenamed Oracle. This project required creating a database system that could handle complex queries and large amounts of information. Larry became fascinated by database technology, recognizing that as computers became more common, the ability to store and retrieve information efficiently would become incredibly valuable. He filed this insight away, not yet realizing it would become the foundation of his fortune. Throughout these wandering years, Larry developed a reputation as a brilliant but difficult programmer. He was extraordinarily talented. He could solve problems other programmers couldn't, write code more elegantly and efficiently than his peers. But he was also arrogant, unwilling to suffer fools, and quick to criticize ideas he thought were stupid. He made enemies easily because he never learned to soften his opinions or pretend to respect people he didn't respect. Larry believed in meritocracy. The best ideas should win, regardless of who proposed them or whose feelings got hurt. Larry got married during this period to Ada Quinn, his first wife. The marriage was turbulent from the start. Larry was obsessed with work, spending every waking hour thinking about computers and programming. He had little interest in the domestic life or emotional intimacy that marriage required. The relationship eventually ended, the first of several failed marriages that would mark Larry's personal life. Larry later admitted he was terrible at relationships, too focused on his ambitions to give partners the attention they needed and deserved. By the mid-1970s, Larry was in his early 30s, working as a contract programmer, still without a college degree, still without any significant achievements to his name. To outside observers, he looked like a smart guy who never quite lived up to his potential, but inside, Larry was planning something big. He'd been reading academic papers about database management systems, particularly a paper by Edgar F. Codd, a researcher at IBM, describing a revolutionary approach to organizing data using relational databases. Larry saw something that IBM didn't: the commercial potential of this technology. The birth of Oracle, betting everything. In 1977, Larry Ellison was 32 years old and ready to stop working for other people. He convinced two colleagues from Ampex, Bob Miner and Ed Oates, to join him in starting a company. They called it Software Development Laboratories, a bland name that gave no hint of Larry's grand ambitions. They had no venture capital funding, no business plan written on fancy paper, no connections to powerful investors. What they had was $2,000 between them, Larry's absolute conviction that he was right, and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Larry had read Codd's paper on relational database management systems and immediately understood its significance. IBM, where Codd worked, was developing its own system but moving slowly, trapped by corporate bureaucracy and unwilling to disrupt its existing mainframe business. Larry saw an opportunity. If they could build a relational database system before IBM brought theirs to market, they could dominate this emerging technology sector. It was an audacious plan. Larry had no experience running a company, no business training, no network of investors or mentors, but he had unshakable confidence in his own intelligence and abilities. The three co-founders worked out of a small office, writing code day and night, surviving on fast food and caffeine, pouring every dollar they earned from consulting work back into development. Larry was the visionary, constantly pushing for bolder features and bigger goals. Bob Miner was the technical genius, the programmer who could actually build what Larry dreamed up. Ed Oates managed the business side, though managed is perhaps too strong a word for their chaotic early operations. They were three guys with a dream and a product that didn't yet exist. In 1979, they released Oracle version 2. They skipped version 1 because they thought customers wouldn't want to buy a version 1 product, believing it would seem unproven and risky. This decision perfectly captured Larry's understanding of business psychology. It wasn't enough to build a great product. You had to make customers believe in it. Oracle version 2 wasn't perfect. It had bugs and limitations, but it worked. And more importantly, it worked before IBM's competing product reached the market. Larry had won the race by being willing to release something imperfect rather than waiting for unattainable perfection. The early customers were mostly government agencies and defense contractors who needed powerful database systems for complex operations. Larry personally sold to these early customers, and he discovered he was a brilliant salesman. He could walk into a room of skeptical executives and, through sheer force of personality and intellectual dominance, convince them to bet on his unknown company rather than established giants like IBM. Larry didn't just sell software, he sold a vision of the future, a future where Oracle was the standard and IBM was the past. But success brought new challenges. Oracle grew rapidly, faster than Larry and his small team could manage. They hired programmers and salespeople as quickly as they could, often making bad hiring decisions because they needed bodies in seats immediately. The company culture reflected Larry's personality: aggressive, competitive, and intensely focused on winning at all costs. Oracle became known for its cutthroat sales tactics, for promising features that didn't yet exist, for doing whatever it took to close deals and beat competitors. Larry renamed the company Oracle Corporation in 1982, finally giving the company a name that matched his ambitions. Oracle wasn't just a product anymore, it was an identity, a brand, a statement of purpose. Larry wanted Oracle to be the Oracle, the source of all data, the system through which information flowed. It was a grandiose vision, but Larry never thought small. He once said, "When you innovate, you've got to be prepared for everyone telling you you're nuts." Larry was prepared for that because he already believed everyone else was wrong and he was right. Throughout the 1980s, Oracle grew explosively. Revenue doubled, then doubled again, then doubled again. Larry took the company public in 1986, creating enormous wealth for himself and early employees. Suddenly, Larry Ellison was rich, not just comfortable, but wealthy beyond what he'd imagined growing up in that modest Chicago apartment. But money wasn't the goal. Money was just a way of keeping score. What Larry really wanted was to win, to dominate, to prove that he was the smartest person in the room, in the industry, in the world. Building an empire, the war with IBM and Microsoft. By the late 1980s, Oracle was a major player in enterprise software, but Larry wasn't satisfied with being just another successful company. He wanted to be the undisputed leader, the company everyone else feared and tried to emulate. This meant direct competition with the giants of the technology industry, primarily IBM, the established titan of business computing, and increasingly Microsoft, the upstart that was rapidly dominating personal computer software. Larry developed an intense rivalry with Bill Gates, Microsoft's founder. Where Gates was careful and calculating, Larry was bold and impulsive. Where Gates built a monopoly through shrewd licensing deals, Larry built Oracle through pure technical superiority and aggressive sales. The two men couldn't have been more different in style, but they were similar in their ruthless competitiveness and unwavering belief in their own rightness. Larry once said, "Bill Gates is a very talented guy, I just don't want to be him." What he meant was that he wanted to beat Gates, to prove Oracle was more important than Microsoft. Larry's competitive fire extended beyond just business rivalry. He needed to win at everything. He took up yacht racing, eventually spending hundreds of millions of dollars to compete in the America's Cup, the most prestigious sailing competition in the world. He bought a fighter jet and learned to fly it. He competed in bicycle races. He collected homes, cars, and art. Everything was a competition. Everything was about being the best, having the most, winning the biggest prizes. Critics said Larry was insecure, constantly trying to prove something. Larry said he simply enjoyed competition and saw no reason to apologize for wanting to win. But Larry's relentless drive created serious problems at Oracle. The company's culture became toxic. Sales teams routinely lied to customers about product capabilities, promising features that didn't exist or wouldn't work as advertised. The philosophy was sell first, figure it out later. This approach generated enormous revenue in the short term, but created disasters when customers realized they'd been misled. Oracle developed a reputation as a company that couldn't be trusted, that put its own profits above customer needs. Talented engineers left, disgusted by the lying and corner-cutting. In 1990, Oracle faced its first major crisis. Years of aggressive accounting practices and premature revenue recognition caught up with the company. Oracle had to restate its earnings, admitting it had inflated revenues and profits for several quarters. The stock price collapsed, falling more than 80%. Analysts predicted Oracle would go bankrupt. Customers fled to competitors. The board of directors considered removing Larry as CEO. This was the lowest point of Larry's career, the moment when all his critics seemed proven right. But Larry refused to quit. He brought in professional managers to fix Oracle's financial controls. He personally called major customers to rebuild trust. He worked around the clock to stabilize the company, taking responsibility publicly while privately blaming others for the crisis. It took nearly 2 years, but Larry steered Oracle through the crisis. The company survived, eventually thrived again, and Larry learned important lessons about the difference between aggressive growth and reckless management. He once reflected, "I have had all the disadvantages required for success, and this crisis became another disadvantage he transformed into eventual strength." Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Oracle methodically acquired competitors and complementary companies, growing through aggressive expansion. Larry pioneered a new strategy in enterprise software: buy your competitors rather than compete with them. Oracle acquired PeopleSoft, Siebel Systems, Sun Microsystems, and dozens of other companies, often through hostile takeovers that Larry personally orchestrated. He would identify a target, make an offer, and if the company's management resisted, Larry would go directly to shareholders, arguing they should force management to accept his offer. These hostile takeovers made Larry even more controversial. He was painted as a corporate raider, someone who destroyed companies and fired thousands of employees just to eliminate competition. Larry's response was characteristically blunt. This was business, not charity. If companies couldn't compete on their own, they deserved to be acquired. If employees lost jobs, that was unfortunate but inevitable. The market rewarded efficiency and punished weakness. Larry believed he was simply playing by capitalism's rules more effectively than others. Larry's personal life during this period was turbulent and widely publicized. He married and divorced multiple times: Nancy Whelan Jenkins, Barbara Booth, with whom he had 2 children, and later Melanie Kraft, a romance novelist. Each divorce was expensive, costing Larry hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements. Yet Larry seemed unable or unwilling to change the behaviors that destroyed his marriages: his obsession with work, his emotional unavailability, his need to always be the center of attention. Friends joked that Oracle was Larry's real spouse, the only relationship he truly prioritized.
But Larry also showed a different side during these years. He became a father to 2 children, David and Megan, and while he was often absent due to work, he loved them deeply and tried to give them opportunities he never had. He established the Ellison Medical Foundation, funding research on aging and age-related diseases, contributing hundreds of millions of dollars to scientific research. He donated to education, supporting programs for underprivileged students. Larry was complicated, capable of ruthless business practices and genuine generosity, of ego-driven competition and thoughtful philanthropy. By 2010, Larry had led Oracle for over 3 decades and built it into a software empire worth over $100 billion. He was one of the richest people in the world, living on his own Hawaiian island, flying his own jets, racing his own yachts. He could have retired, enjoyed his wealth, and become a respected elder statesman of Silicon Valley. Instead, Larry saw a new battle emerging: the shift from traditional software to cloud computing, and he prepared for war. Cloud computing represented a fundamental change in how businesses used software. Instead of buying software licenses and running applications on their own servers, companies could access software over the internet, paying subscription fees for only what they used. Amazon Web Services led this revolution, followed by Microsoft Azure and Salesforce. Traditional software companies like Oracle faced an existential threat. If they didn't adapt to the cloud, they would become obsolete within a decade. Larry's competitors and critics believed Oracle was too old, too bureaucratic, too invested in its traditional business model to successfully transition to cloud computing. They predicted Oracle would follow IBM into slow decline, remaining profitable but increasingly irrelevant as younger, more innovative companies defined the future. Larry heard these predictions and did what he'd always done: decided to prove everyone wrong. At an age when most executives were retiring, Larry prepared to reinvent his company completely. The transition was brutal. Oracle had to rebuild its entire product line for the cloud while continuing to support legacy customers. Revenue growth slowed as customers postponed purchases, waiting to see if Oracle's cloud products would actually work. Wall Street punished Oracle's stock price. Industry analysts wrote articles declaring Oracle's best days were behind it. Inside the company, employees worried about their futures, wondering if Oracle could actually pull off this transformation, or if they should jump ship to younger companies. Larry responded by doubling down. He invested billions of dollars in building data centers around the world to run Oracle's cloud services. He hired thousands of engineers to rewrite Oracle's software for cloud deployment. He personally led the effort, attending technical meetings, reviewing code, pushing teams to work faster and smarter. Larry was in his late 60s and early 70s during this period, but he outworked people half his age. His energy and intensity were legendary. He expected everyone around him to match his commitment, and those who couldn't keep up were replaced. Larry also made strategic bets on emerging technologies. He pushed Oracle into artificial intelligence and machine learning, recognizing that cloud computing combined with AI would create entirely new capabilities. He invested heavily in autonomous database technology, databases that could tune themselves, patch themselves, and protect themselves without human intervention. This wasn't just incremental improvement, it was a fundamental reimagining of what database technology could do. In 2014, Larry stepped down as Oracle's CEO, though he remained chairman and chief technology officer. This move surprised many observers who assumed Larry would never relinquish control. But Larry understood that Oracle needed professional management to execute the cloud transition, while Larry focused on technology strategy and vision. He appointed Safra Catz and Mark Hurd as co-CEOs, executives who could handle operational details, while Larry continued to shape Oracle's technical direction and major strategic decisions. The transition paid off. By 2020, Oracle had successfully moved much of its business to the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure became a serious competitor to Amazon and Microsoft, particularly for customers running Oracle databases who wanted better performance and integration. Revenue growth accelerated again. The stock price recovered and reached new highs. Larry had done what critics said was impossible, reinvented a 40-year-old company for a new technological era. Once again, Larry proved that betting against him was a mistake. Larry Ellison's wealth grew to staggering levels. At various points, he was the third, fourth, or fifth richest people in the world, with a net worth exceeding $100 billion. With that wealth came a lifestyle that was both fascinating and controversial. Larry didn't just spend money, he spent it in ways that reflected his personality: bold, competitive, and unapologetic. Larry bought the island of Lanai in Hawaii, the sixth largest Hawaiian island, for $300 million. He didn't just buy a house there, he bought nearly the entire island, 98% of its land. He transformed Lanai into his vision of a sustainable, technologically advanced community, investing hundreds of millions more in infrastructure, resorts, and renewable energy. Critics called it billionaire colonialism. Larry called it stewardship, arguing he was saving an island whose economy had collapsed after the closure of its pineapple plantation. Larry's yacht collection was equally impressive. He commissioned and owned some of the world's largest and most advanced sailing yachts, spending hundreds of millions on boats that most people couldn't even imagine. But these weren't just toys. He raced them competitively, assembling professional crews and competing at the highest levels of international sailing racing. In 2010 and 2013, Oracle Team USA won the America's Cup under Larry's sponsorship, one of the greatest comebacks in sailing history. Larry was ecstatic. He'd conquered yet another arena where others said he didn't belong. Larry's real estate portfolio expanded to include dozens of properties worth billions of dollars collectively. He bought estates in Malibu, Lake Tahoe, and the San Francisco Bay Area. He purchased an entire neighborhood block in Malibu, assembling adjacent properties over years to create a massive compound. He built replicas of Japanese architecture on his California properties, creating serene gardens and traditional buildings that reflected his interest in Japanese culture and design. Each property was designed to perfection, reflecting Larry's obsessive attention to detail and his need for everything to be the best.
But Larry also used his wealth for ambitious philanthropic projects. He signed the Giving Pledge, committing to donate the majority of his wealth to charitable causes. The Ellison Medical Foundation funded cutting-edge research on aging, cancer, and infectious diseases, contributing hundreds of millions to scientific advancement. Larry made major donations to education, particularly to the University of Southern California, where he funded cancer research programs. He contributed to wildlife conservation, protecting endangered species and habitats. Larry's approach to philanthropy reflected his personality. He wanted measurable results, breakthrough innovations, transformative impacts, rather than incremental improvements. He wasn't interested in funding feel-good programs that didn't produce significant outcomes. He wanted his money to cure diseases, extend human life, solve major problems. Some criticized his approach as too focused on high-profile, technology-driven solutions rather than addressing immediate human needs. Larry's response was that he funded what he understood and believed would make the biggest difference. In recent years, Larry became increasingly involved in political and social issues, though he remained more private about his views than some other billionaires. He supported candidates and causes he believed in, primarily focused on innovation, technology advancement, and American competitiveness. He spoke about the importance of education reform, particularly in science and mathematics, arguing that America was falling behind other countries in producing technical talent. He warned about emerging threats from other nations, particularly China, advocating for stronger protection of American technology companies. Larry's relationships with other tech titans were complex and often contentious. He was close friends with Steve Jobs, the Apple founder, one of the few people Larry genuinely respected and admired. Jobs and Larry were both perfectionists, both demanding, both uncompromising in their visions. After Jobs died in 2011, Larry was devastated, losing one of the few peers he considered an intellectual equal. Larry later joined Apple's board of directors, partly to honor Jobs' memory and partly because he remained fascinated by Apple's design philosophy and execution excellence. But Larry's relationship with other tech leaders was often adversarial. He sued Google in a massive patent infringement case over Android's use of Java, spending years in litigation that ultimately failed. He publicly criticized Mark Benioff, the Salesforce founder and former Oracle executive, calling Salesforce's technology inferior to Oracle's cloud offerings. He dismissed younger entrepreneurs as naive or lucky, arguing that building a sustainable business over decades was harder than creating a hot startup. Larry never learned to be diplomatic or polite when he believed he was right and others were wrong. The legacy. Lessons from a relentless winner. Now in his 80s, Larry Ellison remains actively involved in Oracle as chairman and technology officer. He still works long hours, still pushes for aggressive goals, still believes Oracle can and should dominate every market it enters. His competitive fire hasn't diminished with age. If anything, Larry seems even more determined to cement his legacy as one of the most consequential figures in technology history, not just as successful but as transformative as anyone who ever built a technology company. What can we learn from Larry Ellison's extraordinary journey? First, that belief in yourself can overcome almost any obstacle. Larry grew up abandoned by his birth mother, criticized constantly by his adoptive father, without a college degree or connections or initial funding. Every reason existed for him to fail, to settle for a modest life as a programmer working for someone else. Instead, Larry's unshakable confidence in his own abilities drove him to build one of the world's most valuable companies. He never doubted he could compete with IBM, with Microsoft, with anyone. That confidence wasn't arrogance, it was the foundation of everything he achieved. Second, that competition brings out excellence. Larry's need to win, to be first, to dominate every market, drove Oracle to levels of innovation and execution that a more relaxed approach never would have achieved. Oracle succeeded because Larry pushed relentlessly, accepted no excuses, and demanded the best from everyone, including himself. Yes, this created a harsh culture that many couldn't tolerate, but it also created a company that survived for decades in one of the most competitive industries in the world, that repeatedly reinvented itself when others stagnated. Third, that you can reinvent yourself at any age. When Oracle faced the cloud computing transition, Larry was already in his late 60s, already fabulously wealthy, already accomplished beyond what most people could dream. He could have coasted on past success. Instead, he led Oracle through a complete transformation, betting billions of dollars and his reputation on a new direction. Larry proved that age doesn't determine your ability to adapt, to learn, to compete. Your limitations are mental, not physical. Fourth, that failure is temporary if you refuse to quit.
Oracle nearly went bankrupt in 1990. Larry faced dozens of setbacks, lost lawsuits, failed products, and public humiliations throughout his career. Each time, he could have given up, sold the company, retired with whatever wealth he'd accumulated. Instead, he fought back, learned from mistakes, and emerged stronger. Larry's persistence, his absolute refusal to accept defeat, was perhaps his greatest strength. He once said, "When you innovate, you've got to be prepared for everyone telling you you're nuts." Larry was always prepared for that because he knew most people are wrong about most things. Fifth, that success doesn't require likability. Larry was never beloved. He was respected, feared, admired, but rarely liked in the warm, personal way that some other business leaders were. He didn't cultivate a folksy persona or pretend to be humble. He was difficult, demanding, and ruthlessly honest. Yet he built one of the world's most valuable companies and became one of the richest people in history. Larry proved that being nice is optional, being excellent is not. Sixth, that wealth is a tool, not a destination. Larry could have stopped working decades ago and spent the rest of his life on yachts and private islands. Instead, he continued pushing Oracle forward, continued competing, continued trying to build something bigger and better. For Larry, wealth was never the goal. It was a scorecard, a way of measuring success, but not the success itself. The real goal was to build something lasting, to solve important problems, to prove that his vision of technology's future was correct.
Finally, that your background doesn't define your future. Larry was abandoned, adopted, criticized, told he'd never succeed. He dropped out of college twice. He had no connections, no advantages, no reason to believe he'd ever be anything special. Yet he became one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history. Your circumstances matter less than your determination, your intelligence, your willingness to work harder than everyone else. Larry proved that if you're talented enough and driven enough, nothing can stop you. Your journey starts now. Larry Ellison's story is about more than building a technology company. It's about the power of relentless ambition, of refusing to accept limitations, of believing in yourself when everyone else doubts you. Larry faced rejection, failure, and criticism throughout his journey. He made mistakes, hurt people, and created a company culture that wasn't always healthy. He wasn't perfect, far from it. But he achieved something extraordinary by never giving up, never settling, never accepting second place. If you take one lesson from Larry's story, let it be this: you are capable of far more than you think. The limitations you accept are mostly self-imposed. The critics who say you can't succeed are usually just people who failed to do what you're attempting. The obstacles in your path are real, but they're not insurmountable. Every successful person faced similar challenges and found ways to overcome them. Larry once said, "I have had all the disadvantages required for success." He meant that hardship, criticism, and obstacles aren't reasons to give up. They're the very things that forge the determination needed for extraordinary achievement. Your difficult childhood, your lack of resources, your critics and doubters, these aren't preventing your success, they're preparing you for it. But remember that success requires more than just belief and determination. It requires excellence, sustained effort over decades, continuous learning, and the willingness to reinvent yourself when circumstances change. Larry didn't just work hard, he worked smart. He identified opportunities others missed. He learned new technologies throughout his career. He adapted when the market shifted. Intelligence without work ethic fails. Work ethic without intelligence fails. You need both, relentlessly applied over years and decades. Also remember that success has costs. Larry's marriages failed. He had difficult relationships with colleagues and competitors. He created a company culture that damaged people. His relentless competitiveness sometimes crossed ethical lines. As you pursue your goals, consider what kind of person you want to be, not just what you want to achieve.
Success that destroys your relationships and your integrity is hollow. You can be ambitious and competitive while still treating people with respect and maintaining ethical standards. Think about what you want to build, what problems you want to solve, what mark you want to leave on the world. Larry built Oracle because he saw a technological problem that needed solving and believed he could solve it better than anyone else. What's your equivalent? What problem calls to you? What are you uniquely positioned to address? Your path won't be the same as Larry's, but the principles are universal. Identify an important problem, develop skills to solve it, commit fully, persist through setbacks, and never stop until you succeed. Don't wait for perfect circumstances. Larry didn't have a college degree, didn't have funding, didn't have connections. He started anyway. He learned as he went. He made mistakes and corrected them. Perfection isn't required. Action is. Start where you are with what you have. Take the first step, then the next, then the next. Momentum builds, skills develop, opportunities appear, but only if you start. Embrace competition. Larry's greatest achievements came from competing against the best: IBM, Microsoft, Amazon. He didn't avoid easy markets or avoid challenging himself. Compete where the stakes are highest, where you'll be forced to develop your full potential. That's where growth happens. Believe in yourself, but verify that belief through results. Larry's confidence wasn't blind, it was grounded in his proven ability to write code, to understand complex systems, to solve problems others couldn't. Build your confidence on actual skills and achievements, not just positive thinking. Then let that earned confidence fuel even bigger ambitions. Remember that age is irrelevant. Larry reinvented Oracle in his 70s, an age when most people are fully retired. Your best work might still be ahead of you. Don't use age as an excuse for playing it safe or giving up on ambitious goals. Keep learning, keep adapting, keep competing. The game isn't over until you decide it's over. The final message. As we end this journey through Larry Ellison's remarkable life, remember this: greatness isn't reserved for people with perfect backgrounds or special advantages. Greatness comes from refusing to accept average, from working harder than anyone else, from believing you can achieve what others think is impossible. Larry Ellison was abandoned as a baby, told he'd never succeed, dropped out of college twice. Yet he built one of the world's most valuable companies through sheer determination and intelligence. You have talents waiting to be developed. You have ideas worth pursuing. You have the ability to create something meaningful, to solve important problems, to leave the world different than you found it. But it won't happen automatically. It requires action, persistence, continuous improvement, and an unshakable belief that you will find a way or make one. Larry Ellison once said, "A corporation's primary goal is to make money. Government's primary role is to take a big chunk of that money and give it to others." Beyond his characteristic bluntness, what Larry understood is that creating value, building products that solve real problems, is fundamentally important work. When you build something that improves people's lives, that makes businesses more efficient, that solves significant problems, you're doing something that matters. So start building. Start today. Start with what you have. Don't wait for the perfect moment, the perfect idea, or the perfect circumstances. Larry started with $2,000 and a belief that he could beat IBM. You have more resources than that. You have the internet, access to information, tools that didn't exist when Larry started. The barriers to entry in almost any field are lower than they've ever been. What's stopping you isn't lack of resources, it's lack of action.
Stop making excuses. Larry could have blamed his abandonment, his critical father, his lack of a degree, his lack of connections. He could have said the market was too competitive, that IBM was too powerful, that he was too late. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his skills, his effort, his determination. You can't control your past, your background, or other people's opinions. You can control your actions today and every day going forward. Think bigger than you're comfortable with. Larry didn't want to build a small consulting company or a modest software business. He wanted to beat IBM, to dominate enterprise software, to build an empire that would last generations. That audacious vision attracted talented people, inspired extraordinary effort, and created something far more valuable than a safe, modest approach ever could have. What's your big vision? Not the realistic, safe version, the audacious one that scares you a little. That's the one worth pursuing. Embrace your inner rebel. Society will tell you to follow the rules, to be realistic, to accept your place. Larry ignored all of that. He challenged authority, questioned conventional wisdom, and refused to accept that things had to be done the way they'd always been done. That rebellious spirit isn't about being difficult for its own sake. It's about refusing to let others define your limits. Be respectful but independent. Listen to advice but trust your own judgment. The most important innovations come from people who refuse to accept the status quo. Work harder than anyone else. Larry's success wasn't just about intelligence or vision, it was about relentless, sustained effort over decades. While competitors were comfortable, Larry was pushing. While others took weekends off, Larry was strategizing. While his peers retired in their 60s, Larry was reinventing his company in his 70s. There's no substitute for hard work. Talent matters, intelligence matters, but they're multipliers on effort. Zero effort times any multiplier is still zero. Learn continuously. Technology changed dramatically during Larry's career, from mainframes to personal computers to the internet to cloud computing to artificial intelligence. Larry could have become obsolete by sticking with what he knew. Instead, he continuously learned new technologies, understood emerging trends, and adapted Oracle's strategy accordingly. In your own career, commit to constant learning, read voraciously, take courses, experiment with new tools and technologies. Your knowledge from 5 years ago isn't enough for today, and today's knowledge won't be enough for 5 years from now. Build something that lasts. Larry didn't just want quarterly profits, he wanted to build an institution that would survive him, that would matter decades or centuries from now. Think about legacy, not just immediate success. What will people say about your work 50 years from now? What lasting impact will you have? Building for the long term requires different decisions than optimizing for short-term gains. It requires patience, sustained excellence, and a vision that extends beyond your own lifetime. Surround yourself with excellence. Larry was ruthlessly honest about talent. He hired the best he could find and quickly fired those who couldn't perform at the highest level. He had no patience for mediocrity or excuses. While you should treat people with respect, you should also maintain high standards. The people you surround yourself with will either elevate you or drag you down. Choose teammates, mentors, and partners who challenge you to be better, who maintain high standards, who refuse to settle for good enough. Take calculated risks. Larry bet everything multiple times, starting Oracle with minimal funding, competing against IBM when everyone said it was impossible, acquiring companies in hostile takeovers, transitioning to cloud computing when Oracle's traditional business was still profitable. But these weren't reckless gambles. They were calculated risks based on Larry's deep understanding of technology and markets. Take big risks, but make sure they're informed by knowledge and analysis, not just hope or desperation. Develop thick skin. Larry was criticized constantly for his management style, his acquisitions, his personality, his lifestyle. If he'd let that criticism stop him, Oracle would never have succeeded. You will face criticism, doubt, and ridicule, especially if you're attempting something ambitious. Most of that criticism will come from people who haven't accomplished what you're trying to achieve. Listen to feedback from people who've succeeded in your field. Ignore the rest. As Larry demonstrated, being liked is optional, being excellent is mandatory. Compete fiercely but fairly. Larry's competitive intensity drove Oracle to excellence, but sometimes it crossed ethical lines. Learn from both his successes and his mistakes. Compete aggressively within the rules. Push yourself and your organization to be the best, but don't sacrifice your integrity for short-term advantage. The reputation you build matters. Larry's aggressive tactics sometimes damaged Oracle's reputation and cost the company deals. Excellence without ethics is ultimately self-defeating. Use failure as fuel. Oracle nearly collapsed in 1990. Larry could have given up, blamed others, or made excuses. Instead, he took responsibility, fixed the problems, and came back stronger. Every failure in your journey is either the end of your story or the middle of it. You decide which.